Welcome, dear viewers, to The Last Dance Macabre. Today, we will introduce you to a terrible criminal. He is considered the most prolific serial killer and child molester in modern history. Between 1992 and 1999, he raped, tortured and murdered at least 193 young boys across Colombia and Ecuador. His reign of terror shocked the nation and exposed deep flaws in the criminal justice system. This is the chilling story of Luis Alfredo Garavito, known as the Beast. In 1999, police finally caught up with Garavito and uncovered the grisly truth about his decade-long killing spree. How did this monster evade capture for so long? And what drove him to commit such unspeakable acts? Let The Last Dance Macabre begin as we explore the dark origins and devastating impact of one of history's worst serial killers. The year is 1957 in the small, unassuming town of Genova, Colombia. A baby boy enters the world, unaware of the dark path that lies ahead. His name is Luis Alfredo Garavito, and he will one day be known as the most prolific serial killer and child molester in modern history. Born into a poor family, Garavito faced a childhood filled with unimaginable horrors. His father, a violent alcoholic, routinely beat and abused his 7 children, including the young Luis. But the trauma didn't end there. Neighbors in their impoverished community also subjected Garavito to horrific sexual assaults from a very young age. As the eldest child, Garavito bore the brunt of this abuse, both physical and emotional. The neglect and violence he endured would leave deep scars, warping his psyche in ways no child should ever experience. By age 11, he had dropped out of school, left to fend for himself on the streets. No one intervened to help the troubled youth, to provide counseling for the unimaginable pain he carried. Instead, Garavito's twisted desires and violent impulses were left to fester, a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. Garavito dropped out of school at just 11 years old and drifted through various odd jobs. During his teenage years and early 20s, Garavito continued to struggle with the psychological scars of his traumatic childhood. He developed an addiction to alcohol and began exhibiting antisocial and deviant behaviors. In 1980, at age 23, Garavito began sexually assaulting minors aged 6 to 16, raping and torturing an estimated 200 victims over the next 12 years. This was just the beginning of his reign of terror that would escalate to murder in 1992. Garavito's early crimes involved luring victims to secluded areas with promises of money or treats, tying them up, and sexually assaulting them. During this period, he exhibited signs of sadism, with researchers speculating that torturing his victims may have provided him a twisted form of pleasure. Garavito also began collecting trophies, photos of his victims, clothes, and receipts. In the year 1979, a dark cloud descended upon the Valle del Cauca region of Colombia. A young boy named William Trujillo Mora, just 9 years old, was about to join his friends in play when a sinister figure emerged from the shadows. It was Luis Alfredo Garavito, a 22-year-old man already twisted by darkness. In his hands, he clutched a machete, its blade glinting menacingly in the sunlight. Garavito seized young William, pulling the terrified child close and hissing a chilling warning.
"Scream, and I'll kill you."
Paralyzed by fear, William allowed Garavito to lead him away to an abandoned building. Once inside, the nightmare began. Garavito tied the boy up and subjected him to unimaginable tortures, both physical and sexual, for 12 endless hours, but William, despite his young age, possessed an indomitable will to survive. And so, when Garavito suddenly lost consciousness, likely due to intoxication, the boy seized his chance. Breaking free of his bonds, William fled to safety, his mind scarred forever by the horrors he had endured. His bravery in the face of such trauma was humbling. But while William had survived, the damage was done. A monster had been unleashed upon the world. Garavito's attack on the young boy marked the beginning of his twisted obsession with children. It was a compulsion that would only grow more depraved with each passing year. William Trujillo Mora had been the first to face the darkness that lurked within Luis Alfredo Garavito. Tragically, he would not be the last. In the early 1980s, Luis Alfredo Garavito began sexually assaulting young boys, targeting victims as young as 6 years old. His modus operandi during this period involved luring children to secluded areas with promises of money, treats, or other enticements. One such early attack occurred in 1983, when Garavito encountered 8-year-old Jairo Hernandez selling candy on the streets of Cali. He approached the boy, offering to buy his entire stock if Jairo would accompany him to a nearby park. Unsuspecting, Jairo agreed. Once in the park, Garavito led Jairo to a hidden area behind some bushes. There, he tied the boy's hands behind his back with rope. Jairo began to cry, realizing something was wrong. Garavito then sexually assaulted the terrified child. When he was finished, he left Jairo tied up, alone in the park. Miraculously, Jairo managed to free himself and return home. He told his parents what had happened, but they did not report the assault to police, fearing they would not be believed. Jairo's family belonged to the lower socio-economic class that Garavito often targeted, knowing their children were less likely to be missed or their cases prioritized. In the years following his early assaults in the 1980s, Luis Alfredo Garavito's crimes escalated dramatically in both frequency and depravity. He began collecting gruesome trophies from his victims, which researchers believe provided him a twisted sense of pleasure and control. One particularly horrific example occurred in 1994, when Garavito kidnapped 10-year-old Wilmar Orozco in Pereira. After sexually assaulting the boy, Garavito severed Wilmar's genitals and amputated his toes as trophies. He then strangled the child to death and left his mutilated body in a remote area. In 1997, the discovery of a mass grave containing 36 boys near Pereira prompted a nationwide manhunt for Garavito. One of the victims found in the graveyard was 13-year-old Juan David Uja, whose head had been severed from his body. Garavito later confessed to killing Juan David and keeping his head as a trophy. That same year, Garavito lured a young Mateo Rojas to a secluded area, where he sexually assaulted and murdered the boy. Garavito dumped his body in a ravine. These three cases exemplify the increasingly depraved and violent nature of Luis Alfredo Garavito's crimes over time. His actions progressed from the initial sexual assaults to include horrific acts of torture, mutilation, and murder. It was clear that a monster was stalking the streets, preying upon the most vulnerable members of society. A nationwide manhunt was launched, with police combing every inch of the country for clues. But their target, a predator known only by the chilling moniker La Bestia, the Beast, had managed to slip through their fingers for years. His victims, often the unsupervised children of impoverished street vendors, had simply disappeared without a trace, their fates unknown to all but the monster himself. For 2 more agonizing years, the killings continued as Garavito crisscrossed Colombia, leaving a trail of devastation in his wake. He would lure his prey with promises of money or treats before subjecting them to unimaginable tortures. Most often, he would pose as a priest or monk, using his religious disguise to gain the trust of his young victims. Then, in April 1999, Garavito's reign of terror came to an end. In the city of Villavicencio, he approached a boy, offering him gifts and money. But this time, the child managed to escape Garavito's clutches, running to alert the authorities. Police quickly apprehended the serial killer, who was posing as a local politician named Bonifacio Moreira Lizcono. With the help of a homeless man and several taxi drivers, they were able to positively identify Garavito as their suspect. The beast had finally been caged, but the damage he had wrought was incalculable. Over the course of his killing spree, Garavito had raped, tortured and murdered at least 189 children, cementing his legacy as one of the most prolific serial killers in modern history. The mass grave in Pereira had been the first sign that a monster was stalking the land, and it would take 2 more agonizing years before justice was finally served. After his arrest in April 1999, Luis Alfredo Garavito was held in custody for several months as the investigation into his horrific crimes continued. Detectives and police interrogated the serial killer extensively, determined to uncover the full scope of his depravity. During questioning, Garavito confessed to sexually assaulting and murdering at least 140 young boys across Colombia. He provided chilling details of his modus operandi, posing as a priest, beggar, or disabled person to gain the trust of vulnerable children, before luring them to secluded areas where he would subject them to unspeakable tortures. Forensic evidence from Garavito's home and the crime scenes linked him to dozens of the murders. Police scoured the country, exhuming mass graves and searching for additional victims. In total, Garavito was eventually charged with 189 counts of rape and murder. The trial of the beast was a media sensation in Colombia. Garavito's defense argued he was mentally unfit to stand trial, citing his abusive upbringing and alcoholism. However, psychiatrists determined he was sane and aware of his actions. Prosecutors painted a picture of a calculating predator who had terrorized the nation for nearly a decade. However, due to a legal loophole in Colombia's penal code at the time, Luis Alfredo Garavito was only required to serve a maximum of 40 years in prison, despite being convicted on charges totaling nearly 1,900 years, the longest sentence ever imposed in Colombia, for the rape and murder of at least 189 children. This legal technicality capped the total sentence length, preventing Garavito from serving the full 1,853 years and 9 days he was originally sentenced to. Despite his conviction, Garavito continued to confess to additional murders during his incarceration, eventually admitting to 189 child killings in total. He became a model prisoner, converting to Catholicism and receiving further sentence reductions for good behavior over the years. The news that Garavito's exemplary conduct in prison was being used as grounds for early release sparked outrage and demands for justice. Colombian citizens expressed their anger on social media and in public protests, condemning the legal system for enabling such a dangerous criminal to potentially walk free. President Iván Duque himself denounced the proposal, stating the government firmly opposed any suggestion of releasing that beast. The public outcry highlighted the deep flaws in Colombia's penal code that allowed for such leniency, even for the most heinous of crimes. Calls for reform intensified, with many demanding changes to sentencing laws to ensure serial killers like Garavito serve out their full sentences. The case reignited a national conversation about protecting vulnerable children and preventing such atrocities from occurring in the future. In the end, Garavito's request for early parole was denied by a judge in 2021 on the grounds that he had failed to pay a substantial fine intended for his victims' families. He remained imprisoned until his death from cancer in October 2023 at age 66. However, the public's outrage over the legal loophole that nearly enabled his release highlighted the need for Colombia to strengthen its justice system to better serve victims and prevent such injustices from happening again. In conclusion, we hope this documentary has provided insight into the mind of one of the most prolific serial killers in modern history, Luis Alfredo Garavito. His reign of terror serves as a tragic reminder of the importance of protecting vulnerable children and addressing the root causes of violence in society. If you found this documentary informative and impactful, please consider leaving a like, clicking the notification bell, and subscribing to our channel. By doing so, you'll be supporting our mission to create content that raises awareness about important issues and inspires positive change. Remember, the safety and well-being of our children is the responsibility of us all. Pay attention to the children in your life, whether they are your own or members of your community. Be vigilant for signs of abuse or neglect, and don't hesitate to report any suspicious activity to the proper authorities. Together, we can work to prevent tragedies like those caused by Luis Alfredo Garavito from happening again. By staying informed, engaged, and proactive, we can create a safer world for our children to grow and thrive. Thank you for watching, and remember to take care of yourselves and those around you.